So I'm Eleanor Millman. I'm currently the internal AI product lead for SiriusXM, but until recently, I was the director of product for SiriusXM's platform engineering org, and I held that role for over 2 years. I'm excited to be here today to talk you through a prioritization framework that I developed. So today, I'm hoping you will end up with a how-to guide on how to prioritize platform engineering projects, especially when you have few to no product managers, which of course is oftentimes common in platform engineering orgs. And for those who are not familiar, SiriusXM is a media company. We have satellite radio is kind of our bread and butter, but we also have a bunch of podcasts, sports radio, etc. So as a result, you'll be getting a lot of music-themed graphics in this talk. So let's dive in. So I'm going to set the stage for you. In 2022, SiriusXM created the 50-person platform engineering org that I was part of. And the purpose was to build a new AWS-based platform upon which a whole new tech stack and app rebrand would run. And we were building through 2022 and 2023, and our big launch happened in December 2023. So as we were building this whole new platform, we knew we would serve about 700 internal developers who would be across the whole SDLC on our platform. We had to have broad language and runtime support. Our developers write in Scala, Java, Python, TypeScript, a smattering of others. And we really had to have deep capabilities. So while many of our users were typical backend service owners that you're probably familiar with, we also had some more unusual use cases. For example, our Databricks-based data platform, which runs on our AWS platform, that has its own special needs. And also all kinds of experience levels of the developers we support. So we require infrastructure as code for our higher environments for everyone. And of course, some of the developers who we supported, especially at the beginning, were inexperienced with owning infrastructure. That's not, well, DevOps is, of course, a very common thing at this point. Not every developer is experienced owning infrastructure. Even those that had owned infrastructure, they were not always familiar with AWS, and we are an AWS shop. And then even those folks who had owned AWS infrastructure mostly had owned it for infrastructure as code using Terraform. And we actually use Amazon's CDK Cloud Foundation services as our for infrastructure as code. So all that's to say, especially when developers would onboard, they would be unfamiliar with the infrastructure bit, let alone whatever else they were working on. So all that's to say is we could not assume our developers were all senior developers. We couldn't assume they're all junior. We had a real range of knowledge going on. And mandates. We do mandate that you have to use infrastructure as code for higher environments. But other than that, we have almost no mandates. And so, of course, what that means then is that we have to assume that there is a broader set of use cases that we perhaps have to support. Use cases, languages, frameworks, etc. So, not surprisingly then, we were left with the big question of what should we build and in what order? And just to remember, if you have an externally facing technical product, you're a company, this is your product, usually it covers just one part of the SDLC, and you might very well have a whole team of product managers working on this single product. On the other hand, as I alluded to earlier, being on a platform engineering team, oftentimes you have to make impactful product decisions without having the product staffing that you might want to be able to make those best decisions. The team that I joined, the platform engineering leadership team, did a great job before I joined, but they were finding that as the number of potential projects grew and grew, their prioritization methods weren't scaling. And so I could really help as a product manager coming in, and I was the first product manager in the org. So I looked at it more. Now, I would argue platform engineering has prioritization challenges since it's a non-traditional product area. So for most externally facing products, you build a feature, you release it to users, and you can often measure the revenue a feature generates. So you can prioritize features based on what will bring in the most revenue. Platform, as we know, is twice removed from revenue and end users. Therefore, we can't just use revenue to measure our impact. It's much more complicated. So early on, right when I joined, it was clear to us that we already knew some of the ways we would measure our impact at SiriusXM. So we knew that development speed was something that we could hugely impact and really help the folks we supported, those backend developers. We knew that runtime reliability, so how our end users would experience SiriusXM apps, we knew that mattered. We could really influence security and compliance, cost reduction. But how do we combine them? That was the big question. I looked around to see what others had done in this space, and I couldn't find anything. So I improvised. I started with RICE, RICE, which is a pretty common product management prioritization formula. And I tweaked it a bit. And so you're going to see that formula here. And I will tell you, I'm about to talk you through this formula. We basically put out an MVP and then we gave it a try and we iterated from there. So I'm going to kind of show you how we ended up iterating. So we started with priority, the priority of a project or a feature, whatever we're trying to prioritize, equals first the impact of that feature on users, on stakeholders, et cetera. And impact, we conceptually thought of it as you could have one set of users maybe that are greatly impacted by this project, and then you multiply by the number of users impacted. And you can even have a very complex project where maybe a different set of users are impacted a different amount, and you can multiply by that number of users. Now, I'm going to stay vague on impact. I'm going to actually come back and spend quite a bit more, but just be aware the impact was one of the ways that we prioritized. And then urgency. You really, really do not want to prioritize with urgency. You want to prioritize with impact, that we want to bring value to our users and stakeholders. But very often you do have to prioritize with urgency sometimes. And frankly, we had to a lot, especially pre-launch, because as we worked up to our big launch in December 2023, we had to have a whole bunch of stuff ready for the platform. So I modeled it with a basic step function. Urgency would be a 1, so basically having no effect when the delivery date, the required delivery date was far off. And then as we got closer to whatever date we needed to deliver it by, I just created a step function that got bigger and bigger until it was huge, unless the priority was very high right before delivery, or honestly, let's call it like a month before delivery, whatever time we needed to start working on it. And then in the denominator, we divided by effort. Efforts in dev months, dev weeks, whatever you'd like. And this is pretty typical, what you might use for capacity planning, let's say. Now, the reason efforts in the denominator is if you have two projects where impact times urgency is the same for both of them, then you really want to do the one that takes less effort first because you can deliver it sooner to users. It's basically low-hanging fruit. So we took this, we put it into a spreadsheet, tried prioritizing our projects, and it kind of worked, but we realized we had to make some modifications. First thing we saw was that our larger projects, we had some larger projects that were still very impactful, but they were being deprioritized too much because they were large projects. And of course, you can't just only do small projects. That doesn't work at all. So I used a little bit of mathematical finessing, and I created what you can see here. So I added a 1 plus effort divided by 4. And as I say in the slide, this just dulls the effect of effort. So now larger projects, or smaller projects, let's say, are still prioritized a little bit because they're smaller, but not nearly as much as before. And we're able to start prioritizing those larger, super impactful projects. Next thing we realized is that there were a few projects that really needed to be prioritized because internal stakeholders were saying, like, you got to do it. Now, this is just like urgency. Ideally, you do not prioritize because a stakeholder is saying you have to do it. You want to prioritize based on the value you're going to bring to that stakeholder or the users. But occasionally it happens. For example, security might say you have to set up an audit trail or you won't be in compliance with some standard. And without this, which is honestly a fudge factor, we just couldn't put those projects where they needed to be. So internal business need, we used very infrequently. It's just a multiplier, and we would frankly tune it to get the project where we needed it to be in our prioritization list. But this is a cheat, and we used it very little, and the formula won't work well if you cheat all the time. Let's put it that way. Okay. So that worked up until launch. And then something actually very good happened. Post our enormous launch, we were able to basically stop using urgency as we want to. You shouldn't build it because it's urgent. You should build it because it's impactful. The only time now that we really use urgency is if we have like a vendor contract either expiring or coming up for renewal. Maybe we have to get off of whatever the vendor's selling. Okay, that is a true deadline, and we'll use the urgency for that. But other than that, we've really been able to push back and say that's not a true deadline. So we don't really prioritize with urgency anymore. And ditto with internal business need. We've been able to kind of push back enough on priority and like building best value items for our users that we've been able to basically avoid using it. So I hope that you can also get to a state like this. Okay, so let's go back to impact. You should be saying the other stuff makes sense, that's fairly easy to model, but impact, that's the hard part for prioritization, and the devil is in the details there. So I want to zoom in on that. So as I mentioned before, we already knew that we had these four impact factors that we thought really describe the value that platform engineering brings to SiriusXM in our case. So development speed, I think that's pretty clear. You know, developers helping developers release features faster, bug fixes, etc. And I would postulate that most companies probably care most about this from their platform engineering team in most situations. Now, runtime reliability, I'm going to dive in a little bit more on that. So us as SiriusXM, our end users are listeners, folks listening to our music channels, our podcasts, etc. And so we cared about runtime reliability. We cared about things like our users having low latency, low error rate on the app, hopefully no downtime on the apps. And so as we were thinking about the impact we had, if we had a project that would decrease latency, error rate, downtime, things like that, we would give it points in this category. Now, I'll note that CI/CD pipeline stability and speed, I'll say, did not go in this category because our listeners would not notice if our CI/CD pipelines went down, unless, of course, there was an urgent hotfix, yada, yada. But that's pretty rare. And so instead, if we had a project that made our CI/CD pipelines more stable, we would give credit to that project in developer speed because, of course, pipelines being down means developers cannot develop very quickly. Now to security and compliance, it is what it sounds like. Examples of projects that got points in this category were things like implementing security scans in pipelines or maybe adding mandatory WAF, so web application firewall rule sets. So that made sense. And then cost reduction. For us, we decided to define this as just infrastructure cost. And so for us, it was mostly our AWS and Datadog bills. So, for example, we had a project that was around support for ARM on ECS Fargate, which is cheaper than running on x86. And so we were able to prioritize that because we were able to give points for cost reduction, and that helped it rise in our prioritization formula. I will note that we chose to not count time saved when we help develop backend developers become more efficient. We did not, even though that does, of course, equate to money in some ways, we decided to not give credit here. If we save developers time, we give a project credit in our development speed category, and we didn't really want to double count that sort of thing. So as with the formula, this was our MVP, and we went out and gave it a try. We tried ranking our projects. And what happened was we realized we were missing some things. So first, we realized we're missing our own efficiency. We're Platform Eng, that's our org. Basically, there were projects like refactors, et cetera, making changes that would make our code reviews more efficient that we wanted to do, but we couldn't prioritize without this impact factor. So just for example, our software delivery team wanted to do some work to make it easier for them to write automated tests for our shared GitHub Actions workflows. That project could only be prioritized by getting a significant number of points in this category. So we added it in, and that helped. The next impact factor we realized we were missing was user trust. So remember, I said that we had almost no mandates for the developers we support. And what that means then in practice is that every time we release a new feature, we have to convince our users to adopt it. We have to foster adoption. We cannot mandate adoption. And of course, convincing folks to use something you release is a lot easier when they have trust in you. So we started to recognize that we wanted to give projects that helped build that user trust. We wanted to give them a little bit of extra bump, a little boost. Any project that originated from a user feature request would get a bump. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not saying if a user asks for a feature, you automatically build it. That is a terrible idea. You should absolutely be looking at the value that the project brings, not that the user asked. But a user asking, it gives a little bit of a bump because then they feel like we're being responsive and listening to their needs. Sometimes a few times, especially early on, there were basic features that like had to be part of any modern cloud platform. We didn't feel like we could be taken seriously as a platform engineering org if we didn't build certain things. So we counted those projects. They got a bit of a bump in this category. And lastly, anything that prevented something we own from going down would sometimes get a bit of a bump. Just for example, as I said, we use GitHub Actions and we own the runners on which the actions run. And at least at first, they were not auto-scaled. They were pre-provisioned. And so we realized at a certain point that auto scaling would be a great project. Of course, it gave us cost benefits, but in addition, it built user trust, and thus it got points both in cost reduction and in user trust. Because of course, if a developer is sitting around waiting for a runner to start their build job and it's not happening, like that doesn't feel very good. That reduces user trust, not increases. And of course, also I believe for that project, we gave some points in development speed as well. One other example for this category is we self-host our GitHub instance that's associated with our platform. And we knew if it went down and for sure stayed down, we would look bad. So when there were projects that would help keep our GitHub instance stable and up, we would prioritize those projects in whatever way made sense, plus giving some points in user trust. And very lastly, from our inception, we wanted to be data-driven. And yet, we had found it was very hard. You have to build telemetry in places that you want to monitor and features that you want to monitor. Of course, you need a metrics platform. You need a place to store data and query that data. You need a dashboarding tool. And so we just weren't building what we needed to because we couldn't prioritize those projects. Adding this impact factor, this plat-eng data-driven, helped us with that. Okay, so those are the 7 impact factors that we ended up with after a bit of iteration. We could have weighted them all equally, I suppose, but we had the ability to give them different weights, and we wanted to take advantage of that to reflect priorities of the company. So here on the left-hand side, you've got the 7 impact factors I just talked you through. Now let's look at that pre-launch column. So this is, of course, before our December 2023 launch. Well, I went around and talked to stakeholders early on and I said, what do you care about most? And every single time they said development speed, because of course, everyone in our tech division was heading towards this big launch and it was ambitious. We had to build a lot of stuff. So development speed got 30%, or was weighted at 30%. Next was runtime reliability because we really wanted to make sure we built a great product to be released and we wanted to make sure it was high quality, et cetera. So it got 20%. And then the rest all seemed important, so we equally divided them up. They each got 10%. And that worked quite well until launch. And then post-launch, we started to have massive amounts of traffic running through our AWS infrastructure. No surprise there. And of course, then the focus turned to how do we reduce costs? First of all, we bumped up our cost reduction weight from 10% to 20. That, of course, allowed us to start prioritizing projects that reduce cost, to prioritize them higher. Also, we had put off a lot of our own work as we were heading towards launch. We were working frantically to get built what needed to be built. And so we had refactors that had built up that we should have been doing. As I mentioned, we wanted to be able to do better code reviews, et cetera. And so post-launch, we really wanted to pay down that tech debt. So by bumping up the platform engineering efficiency category from 10% to 20%, we could start prioritizing those projects that would help us become more efficient, which of course, once we're more efficient, then we can deliver features more quickly to our users. So it really does benefit them as well and the company as a whole. And lastly, being data driven. We hoped that 10% weight would be enough to build the telemetry and metrics platform that we needed, and it wasn't. So we bumped it up another 5% because we still wanted to be data driven and we needed to get those projects built. Now, if you raise some weights, you have to reduce others, of course. I want to call out runtime reliability. You'll see it drop from 20% to 10%. That one was actually intentional and felt very good because uh, post-launch, we had data finally in prod. We saw that there were very few Sev1 incidents through developer surveys. We could see that our developers were saying that the technical systems, the backend systems were quite stable and high quality. So we were able to feel confident that we didn't have to prioritize new projects that helped runtime reliability. We still care about runtime reliability, but we didn't need to do even better. So we could drop that. Ditto with security, for example. We didn't have security concerns, like we felt comfortable lowering that. And the others just had to go down. And I will mention, I'm showing you two columns, two snapshots in time, pre-launch and post-launch. Actually, what we ended up doing is every quarter we would take a look at our OKRs, our objectives and key results. We'd look at what the company OKRs were, and we would realign these OKRs. And then we would turn and look at these impact factors and tune them based on what our OKRs were. So when the company OKR was cost reduction, and then we gave ourselves platform engineering a cost reduction objective, well, that's when we turned and we tweaked the cost reduction impact factor. And the long part was the discussion, deciding what we want to do. Changing it was changing a number in a formula. So it was very easy once we decided what we wanted to do. Okay, so that was the formula. And finally, let's get to the final piece and let's talk about projects. Now, across the x-axis on top, you have those 7 impact factors. Unfortunately, I did switch platform engineering, a smidge different ordering, but same topics. And on the y-axis, you have various projects, and I just called them Project A, B, C to just make it simpler, but I will tell you that this is actually a snapshot of real projects. This screenshot is from monday.com. That's what we use to run our formula and keep track of our projects pre-execution. I will mention that our POC was in Google Sheets, so you can use any spreadsheeting software to do this that allows you to do formulas. Now on the right, you'll notice that there's a key. So we had to give points to each category, to each project for each impact factor category. 0 meant no or very minimal impact. 1 was low impact, 2 medium, 3 high, and 5 was massive, massive impact. You'll see we did a bit of a Fibonacci series there, or Fibonacci curve, whatever you want to call it. We skipped 4. And we really worked hard to make 5, that massive impact, mean something. Like we really worked hard not to use it very much and to, because if you give everything a 5, then nothing has a 5 is maybe a way to think of it. And so the way to read this is, let's look at Project A. Project A got a 3 for speed, for development speed. So we thought it would have high impact on development speed, make development go faster. We gave it a 2 for runtime reliability. So we thought it would have a medium impact on things that our end users, our listeners would experience, like latency. We gave it a 3 for platform engineering efficiency because we thought it would have high impact on making ourselves more efficient. And then it got 0s for everything else because it was not relevant. And you'll notice that almost none of these projects have values, non-zero values for all the categories. It looks like Project C does, but kind of an aberration. So you can just evaluate how the project is impactful, and this lets you do it. Okay, almost done. We are still in our iteration. It was feeling better and better, and yet we realized we're missing one more thing. So we would sometimes have these conversations, these prioritization conversations in live meetings, but who has infinite time? Like meetings take up so much of your calendar. And so as we got better at it, we realized we could do some of these discussions, the simpler ones, asynchronously on Slack. So one is, how do we do a good async Slack conversation? Also, once usually it was more leadership or kind of engineering managers say having these conversations. Once we decided on a prioritization, those prioritization numbers, we wanted to be able to share out to the rest of the org and for sure folks working on the project why we decided what we decided. I'll note, when possible, we tried to have the engineers working on a project involved in the discussions from the beginning. Sometimes it was easier to predict who would work on a project, and sometimes it was harder. And then lastly, sometimes we ourselves would look back a month later and think, why did I give that project a 2 for cost reduction? What was I thinking? So it all pointed to the need for a bit of documentation. Now, I am allergic to heavyweight processes as much as I prefer not. So I chose the simplest way to document. And that's simply put what I call the priority explain column. So I dumped a column in Monday.com, just a simple long text column, and we would just write out. I'm about to show you literally what was written for a project, and we would just write a sentence explaining our reasoning. And that's all we found we really needed to do most of what we needed to do documentation wise. So okay, so I mentioned to you early on, user trust. One of the things that got points in that category was if we felt like, oh, um, the, a modern cloud platform needs X. I'm telling you, this is a project that really got points in that category. This is a project we did fairly early on because it was needed. So in short, we wanted to make sure we could do cost attribution for AWS and cost attribution by which backend service was accumulating cost, et cetera. So really be able to have some granularity. We said, first of all, that absolutely there is an urgency date in this case. For us, it was really launch. We knew that there'd be this surge of cost post-launch, and finance would want to understand it. So we wanted to have it done by launch. And honestly, we wanted to have it done a month or two before launch so we could test it out, et cetera. Next, development speed. We knew that if we didn't provide the granularity that this project would do, we knew that finance would maybe go to FinOps, who would go to the engineers and say, where is this cost coming from? And then the engineers would have to do a whole bunch of digging and thinking, et cetera. And we realized then that if we give this granularity, if we get ahead of this and we provide a good way to do it, then we'll save engineers a bit of time. So they got a 1. Low impact for development speed, but still saving some time. Nothing for runtime reliability. Listeners were not at all affected. Ditto for security and compliance. A 5 for cost reduction, because obviously you can have massive impact on cost reduction if you can visualize the costs you're trying to reduce. So I've got a 5. Efficiency, just same argument really as development speed. We own our own infrastructure or some of our own infrastructure, and so we need to be able to explain where costs are going. So granularity and cost helps us too. Trust, as I hinted at, I guess I said that part too early. Yeah, so a modern cloud platform should have cost attribution, so it got some points here. And lastly, being data-driven. Obviously, having more data around costs allow us to make better data-driven decisions around spend. So there you have it. That's that. I'll point out, as the title implies, this has a proven track record. Over 200 projects have been prioritized using this method over about 2 years. What I personally love most about it, I as a product manager, is that it's very user focused, or it can be. So to align on prioritization numbers, you have to talk, or you have to agree, you have to get a few folks in the room, ideally, an engineering manager, directors, product managers, et cetera. And you all talk and you say, hey, I think it's medium impact for security. And if someone else disagrees with you and think, no, no, it's high impact for security, if there's this disagreement that you can't quickly resolve, well, oftentimes the trick is you should go out and talk to whoever can help you with this. So for security, maybe it's our InfoSec we would go talk to, or if we were talking about development speed, we should go talk to the users who we think will be impacted by this project. So I'm happy with any process that forces folks to do user research when it's appropriate to question assumptions. It's usable out of the box. I hope you can see that. But on the other hand, it's quite adaptable. I think our impact factors are likely common to most platform engineering orgs. But if you disagree, you can throw some out, change their definitions, add some in. Likewise, you saw that with the weights, you can tweak them. And frankly, you should tweak them as often as your org and company-wide priorities change. Really, in the end, I found a lot of people when they heard about this, even inside platform engineering, would say, gosh, that's such a rigid process. But it's really not. Like if your gut feels wrong, then don't keep going. Like ask yourself why your gut feels wrong. Go do your user research if you're making bad assumptions about users. Maybe you're not taking into account a company priority that you should be, and maybe you need to tweak the formula in some other ways. Or maybe you just have to get a bunch of folks in the room and like get everyone aligned on like what's the overall picture. So really, I actually see this prioritization formula. It's more it's a way to push everyone to have the conversations they should be having one way or another. So I would argue it's super easy to set up as a POC. Go do it in Google Sheets. I invite you to try it out, and I wish you lots of luck on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. This was really, really insightful. I truly enjoyed it. In the meantime, guys, you can start asking questions. As I mentioned, please put them in the chat or also in the Q&A section. And while you're typing those in, I have a question for you, Eleanor. Regarding this framework, right? Like, how did you ensure the buy-in from both sides, from leadership, from developers? Like, at least this is what we see. It is hard for most companies, right? Like to get this alignment since you have so many stakeholders that are involved in the platform.
Yeah, that's a good question. And in some ways, we're a little lucky. My manager, the person who hired me, Jared Walensky, he was the head of our org. And he, from the beginning, he's got a great product mind. And so he really got this need for figuring out the value to various stakeholders and users and bring it together. So he was such a champion. And I paired with him very closely as we developed this early on. So in a way, so in terms of alignment, it was talking to various stakeholders. He would go out, I would go out, and we would be able to kind of bring back and say, you know what? This is what we think we should do. While we did show this to external stakeholders, we didn't necessarily advertise it. You don't necessarily want to tell a stakeholder, we think you're X% important compared to everything else. But it made us comfortable, much more comfortable because we would have those discussions. So that's kind of stakeholders. Now, developers, I won't lie, there is definitely some resistance to this at my peers level and maybe one level below. Some of it was kind of being a product manager, going around and thinking of them temporarily as my users and saying, this previous prioritization process before this framework, like what worked well, what didn't. And I certainly heard, God, we're having the same discussions again and again. We just every week we kind of squint at a list and say, oh, I think it should go up or down. So it helped that I was coming in with an imperfect process and I brought something that helped in many ways. That certainly sold a few people on it. And I in general would recommend this for any process. Ideally you try something very simple and then you figure out if there are pain points and then you add something heavier weight if that hopefully addresses those pain points. And lastly, same with the developers. Early on, we did not do a great job of bringing developers in. And I really believe this, whether you're using a formula or not. Ideally, you have the developers who will be building a feature, be involved in deciding like where their time is best spent and which feature should be built. So some of the product managers who reported to me would bring this to the teams they supported. They would all get in a room, they would debate together the prioritization numbers, and that really sold the developers. And I'll just throw it in. And even one of the last pushbacks we got was those values of massive impact or high, the 5, 3, 2, 1, developers were like, what do those mean? Everyone asked that. And it was a means to an end in the short term, but some of the product managers started developing more clear guidance, like, oh, for cost reduction, if it's from $1,000 to $10,000, that's a low impact. So that actually came from developers, and that was a valuable addition that we didn't quite put everywhere, but it really helped where we used it.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. We have a question from Amanda. What tool or method do you use to poll developers?
Yeah. Oh, I have so much to say about that. So we, in a good way. So I think I'm okay to say this publicly. We use a tool called DX, and it actually today they announced it was
Yeah,
acquired by
I
Atlassian.
was gonna say that. Good for them. Oh
It
my God.
It's a good day for them. I will say they were awesome partners. I would be like, hey, could you add this little thing to the UI? And within a day, they would add it. So they're a
Oh my
great
God, that's
team.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're celebrating
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. There's going to be some very happy people over there. But so to tell you, so DX, of course, stands for Developer Experience. It's a company. They've developed a quarterly survey where they go and ask developers a bunch of questions, and they have researchers at the company. So people, I think the founder or the creator of Space and the creator of Dora, folks who worked with that, they have them at the company. So look, I'm a product manager and I'm a pretty good user researcher, and yet I don't trust myself to write top-notch survey questions. Like there's real skill in being a user experience researcher. So I love that the DX survey is written by them. They've studied it. They also now have enough customers where you can have like benchmarks. Okay, I'll stop raving about DX. So A, we used a tool DX. We did quarterly developer surveys. That was really helpful. DX later on, we were beta adopters and we loved it, had a thing called DX studies. So those were more targeted surveys. We were lucky we could say, oh, let's choose everyone who is really struggling with infrastructure as code. We would have that from our quarterly survey that went to everyone. We would target in maybe those folks who really struggled, and we would go ask them an additional subset of questions. And then the folks who like had interesting answers, maybe we would go and then do user interviews. So back to the question, I mean, I would say, let me take a step back. In terms of understanding your users, if you barely talk to users, go talk to them. That's the first step. Go talk to users. And what's great about being working on an internal developer platform is your users are really close. They're a Slack message away. Like when I've done user research externally, I have to work with like a designer and they have to go find people and I don't know what we do. It's just complicated. Whereas internally, you just go talk to them. And then if you're doing that, consider a survey. I guess I'll stop there, but it's a great question. There's so much to say about it.
Yeah, I should probably do a separate talk on just how to
Yes.
run surveys. How do you get people to share and get them to speak? I guess that's that's the biggest.
Yeah, and you don't want to over survey. You want to ask the same questions again and again so you can get trends. There's a real art to it, to your point, a real art and a real science.
Very interesting. Cool. Another question that we have here. A project doesn't work and you do a rollback and do some fixes. So redo it. What do you do? Do you put it back in the list?
Great question. Just to answer this, I'm going to just handy to be staring at. We'll go here. Yeah, I think, okay, there's two answers. There's a few answers. There's no one exact answer. What I would say is it depends when it doesn't work. One thing that we were starting to do more and more is say, like, what's the definition of done of a project? And really, what we were trying to get to was it's not done until it works and it's hitting good adoption numbers. So I would argue that if you do a project and then you have to roll it back and redo it, like if it's the same project, I would say you've never finished that project and maybe look at your definition of done. On the other hand, let's say you do a project, it doesn't really accomplish your goal, and you need to do a whole separate project. You can just put it in. I don't think it needs to be treated specially because let's say you want to increase developer speed. You do a project and it only has half the impact you thought it would. Like you do a little bit, but you don't do a lot. Well, if you have another project that will hopefully accomplish that other half of the speed increase that you missed, well, you just give it credit for that impact that it will give you that specific project. You just give it half credit. So so I would argue, at least from what I hear of the question, that you can treat the formula the same. But I'd be happy to hear a follow-up question if I've kind of missed the point of this.
Yeah. So let's say if you have a follow-up question, please add it here to the Q&A. No, great. Thanks, all clear. Do you recommend weekly or bi-weekly sprints?
Interesting question. So first of all, I will say, because I was the sole product manager for a 50-person org, I think most of the time the ratio was one product manager to 37 developers. I was not involved at the team level. And it was sad because I think that's really fun working at the developer level. All that to say is each team maybe some of them did sprints, maybe some of them did iterations, Scrum, XP, I don't know. So at the team level, I was not really involved with this. I can tell you that we would look at this pretty regularly, like every 2 weeks, we would kind of take a glance. We'd get together the engineering managers and product managers and engineering directors. We would all get together pretty frequently because we looked at this on the org level. We would have all the projects slotted in together at the org level, and we would look at each team level to see where they were aligned. I guess my point is, let me pause actually. Let me go back to the original question. Whether it was a 1 or 2 length sprint, it wasn't really relevant. These were on the project level. And for us, we said that we wanted projects to be 4 weeks of developer effort minimum to be in this. So one developer working for a month or a squad, so 4 developers working for a week. So all that to say is I didn't have to worry about length of sprints. really the most interesting discussion was maybe happening a month or two before developers picked this up at all, because a month or two before is when you're trying to figure out the prioritization of your projects ideally, because then in the month before it's picked up, you go and do more user research, more investigation so that you can write a good product brief describing the requirements. But again, if I'm missing the point of the question, I'm happy to hear follow up or yeah, answer more.
Great, thanks for sharing. So, all good. Thanks, Eleanor. Next question from Carlos. Yeah, by the way, you can only put in questions in the Q&A or chat. I see that someone is raising their hands. Unfortunately, all the attendees are in listen-only mode. Sorry about that, guys. So if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A section. But back to the question. So Carlos says that he especially enjoyed the iterative tweaking of the impact weights against OKRs. So great job on that, Eleanor. And the question is curious about how you avoided double counting some of the impact weights that affect end users, for example, reliability with the reach factor in your formula.
Um, Yes, it was certainly a topic of conversation, and it was way harder than I would have thought. Really, it was just through clear communication. And when we went to that priority explained, it was just being even a bit more granular. Uh, just for example, we were maybe talking about AWS SSO or I don't know, some kind of SSO login. And we said, oh, well, this group of users will be heavily impacted, and then this other group of users will save like a minute or two. By being more granular, we could be very clear about where we were counting the time, say. We also did so A, just like documenting more and being clear. Also, early on, I would argue that if you take a bit more time to be clear on the definitions of your impact factors, that'll help because early on, development speed and cost reduction, we kind of realized, oh, developer time, are we counting it for both? Or same thing, CI/CD stability that I mentioned, runtime reliability or development speed. But once you're very clear on the definitions of your impact factors, it gets easier. And I would argue, lastly, with the double counting, it'll be much worse at the beginning as you try it out with your team. Like, expect a number of long meetings up front to hash it out and go through your current list of projects. Once we went through our first 50, and certainly in our second year of using the formula, it was much, much clearer what goes where, and we were able to better avoid double counting.
Makes sense. And the next question from Luck. Tracking the efficiency, productivity of developers is always sensitive. How your organization put this into practice and any pushback encountered?
You're triggering me on another little prepared talk I have because I feel so strongly. So first of all, we never got so granular for this prioritization formula that we had to worry about it. But absolutely, as we were trying to be more data driven, we for sure had that conversation in our org. And so what I said to everyone as often as I could was that metrics, it's a good way to use metrics, and there's a bad way. The bad way to use metrics is to judge people, judge teams by them. Exactly to your point. And really, it's like looking at individual developer metrics. That's not good. And when people are scared of being judged, they will behave differently, and it's not helpful. It's bad for psychological safety. Even if people aren't trying to, they will game it. They will game the metrics. They'll try to make them better, and you're going to push them too far in a way you don't want them to go. What metrics are good for is stimulating conversation. So if we're looking at a team like, hey, X, the team that owns service X, they seem to have much slower pipelines than everyone else. We wanted to go investigate. We didn't want to make them self-conscious, like, hey, you built slow pipelines. So we would just ask questions. So to me, the metrics are great because they make you ask questions. Hey, what are you doing with your pipelines to make them that helps resulting in them slow? That was poorly said. Why are your pipelines slow? Like, what's going on? Or actually, where we did have this conversation was with adoption. One of our platform engineering teams would release a feature, it would have low adoption, and we worried that folks would feel judged by that. And again, it was I see low adoption as a product manager. I'm not judging the developers. I'm not judging myself or whoever designed it. I just want to know why there's low adoption. It's because we didn't advertise it well enough, so people didn't know about our feature. Maybe they tried it, but we don't have enough onboarding support. Maybe they got onboarded, but it didn't really suit their needs. So again, I think it's again and again and again repeating that metrics are for starting interesting conversations. They're not for judging, especially you don't look at metrics for individuals. And lastly, I think you got to have leadership repeating that too. So I was in a leadership position, so I could help with that. And I would hope that at every level, people would be echoing metrics are for good conversations. They are not for judging.
Yeah, it's very, very important, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
Psychological safety. Um, yeah, like says thanks, and I look forward to your future talk on this particular topic. So we gotta schedule another one, Eleanor.
Sounds great.
Cool. Look, they don't want to let you go. We're on time already,
I'm
but
delighted to stay over. It depends what other timing people have.
cool. So business leaders often prioritize projects based on business metrics like revenue, while product managers may focus on product metrics like user engagement. How do you help them account for those factors and assign right weights?
Yeah, well, I would argue that a product manager who is only focusing on product metrics when there are business metrics being ignored, I don't think that they're quite doing their job. Like, at least as a product manager, I've traditionally felt, and I've seen this in others, that your job is to own that product, and you both represent users for sure. Your job is to represent the user and make sure you build a great product, but you also have to represent the business. And so your job is to also talk to stakeholders and understand what they want from the product. So one of the hard parts of being a product manager is exactly that. You have to take business requirements and you have to take user requirements and meld them into one prioritization list. So I would argue that's exactly what this formula does. Like, I would argue it solves that problem. Things like development speed, I think both the business cares about that and developers generally want to be efficient. Security and compliance, look, there's a few developers who are very security minded, but most just don't want to think about it. So security and compliance is there to represent InfoSec. Cost reduction is there to represent finance, um, etc. So I guess what I would say is using the formula helps. And of course, you have to have the right people in the room. You should have that business stakeholder who is really caring about business needs. You have that product manager who's very focused on the product metrics. And ideally, they come together. And in the end, this will not solve it for you, but I would hope that it would push to have the right questions and the right conversation out in the open. You want those two people to say, we need product or we need to make users happy. We need to make the business happy. And then whoever brings them together, you got to resolve it somehow. So there's no magic, but at least this hopefully makes the right conversations happen.
Perfect. Okay, so if you guys don't have any other questions, I think we can call it the day, call it the end of the session. First of all, thank you so much, Eleanor. It's been truly a really, really interesting talk, and thank you so much for spending time to prepare it, as well as I don't know, your eyes light up whenever you talk about product management. It's really, really cool to see. And yeah, if you have any other questions, Eleanor is on Slack, so you can follow up there. We're going to send over the slides and recording to everyone. We should schedule another two webinars, I guess, with you. So I'll follow up on that. And hope everyone has the great rest of their day. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Take care, everyone.